I still remember the sound of my uncle's laugh, sharp, loud, like he wanted the whole restaurant to hear him. "She can't even afford to be here." That's what he said, out loud, in the middle of dinner, while waiters walked by and jazz music floated through the air. He said it with a grin on his face and a fork in his hand, like it was some kind of joke. And the worst part? No one said a word, except my mother. She didn't laugh, but she didn't stop him either. She leaned in closer to my brother like she didn't know I could hear her and said, "She's probably still living off child support," like I wasn't sitting 3 chairs away, like I hadn't been working 2 jobs for the past 7 years, like I was invisible. And for a second, I wished I was. I looked at the faces around the table. My Uncle Leonard, always the loudest voice in any room. My mom, Patrice, who never missed a chance to bring up how much I used to dream big. My older brother, Marcus, who looked down at his plate like if he didn't make eye contact, it didn't count. And Grandpa Reggie, who just shook his head like he was disappointed again. Same table, same people, same stories. They've been writing me off for years, ever since the divorce. Ever since my ex left and I was stuck raising a toddler on my own, trying to keep the lights on while pretending everything was fine. To them, I was the broke one. The one who made bad choices. The poor girl with a kid and no future. Even when I showed up dressed nicely, hair done, shoulders back, they still only saw the version of me they wanted to see. And I was ready to let it go. Again. Just sit there, smile, and eat my overpriced chicken breast in silence. That's what I always did. But then, something happened I didn't expect. From beside me, my 10-year-old son, Jalen, shifted in his seat. He looked up at me, then at the table, then stood up on his chair. Not with anger, not with fear, just calm, serious, and loud enough for everyone to hear. "We bought this restaurant last week." Just like that. 7 words. 7 words that stopped the entire table. Forks froze mid-air. Leonard's mouth dropped open. Therese blinked. Grandpa leaned forward like he wasn't sure if he heard correctly. Marcus looked up at Jalen for the first time all night. "My mom owns part of it now. We're not broke. She just works hard." Silence. Heavy silence. It was like the music had been turned off. The laughter disappeared. Nobody spoke. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. I hadn't planned for him to say anything. I never even told the whole family about the business deal. I hadn't wanted to. I was still trying to process it myself. After all those years of scraping by, saving everything, side hustling at night while Jalen slept, I'd finally bought into something real. A share in this place, Vincent's, with help from a business grant and a private investor I'd pitched to for months. But I didn't tell them. Why would I? They never asked. Jalen knew, though. I told him everything. He sat beside me when I signed the papers, helped me carry files, practiced his fancy restaurant manners for the day he could see it in person. To me, it was just another step toward a better life. To him, it was everything. And in that moment, when my own family laughed at me like I was nothing, he stood up and told them who I really was. A mother, a fighter, a businesswoman. I looked at him standing on that chair in his little button-down shirt and sneakers, eyes wide and hands shaking just slightly. But his voice didn't crack. He didn't hesitate. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. "She just works hard," he said again, and somehow it hit harder the second time. There's a lot more to this story. What happened after, how the room reacted, how things changed. But that moment, that second when my 10-year-old son silenced an entire table of adults with one truth, that's where it all began. My name is Amira Wynn. I'm a single mom, and for a long time, I was the family disappointment. Not because I failed, but because I didn't live the way they thought I should. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment with my 10-year-old son, Jalen. It's not fancy. The building has creaky stairs and paper-thin walls, but it's safe, and more importantly, it's ours. Every morning I get up at 5:30. I make Jalen's breakfast. He likes blueberry waffles and turkey bacon. Then I get dressed for my full-time job as a school administrative coordinator. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. I answer phones, handle parent meetings, juggle teacher schedules. I'm the invisible glue holding everything together. Then, when Jalen's asleep, I start my second job. I'm a freelance resume writer and branding coach for small businesses. I built that from scratch. No business degree, no mentor, just Google, grit, and a lot of late nights. I've helped over 400 clients in the past 5 years, quietly, from my kitchen table. But to my family, none of that mattered. To them, I was just Amira with the failed marriage. Amira who couldn't keep a man. Amira who always had a new hustle but no real money. They never asked what I was doing or how Jalen and I were managing. They just assumed we were barely scraping by, and I let them think that. I didn't have the energy to keep correcting them. I stopped trying to explain my life to people who had already decided how my story would go. It was easier to stay quiet, but my son saw everything. He saw me pay bills with shaking hands. He saw me return groceries when the total went over what we had. He saw me take meetings on the phone while stirring spaghetti on the stove. And he never once complained. Jalen has this stillness about him. He's only 10, but he notices things most adults miss. He watches, he listens, and he remembers. He remembers what it was like when my car got repossessed in the grocery store parking lot. He remembers sleeping in my bed when the heat went out in December. But he also remembers the night we danced in the kitchen when my first big client paid in full. He remembers the high fives when we mailed in the application for a small business grant. He remembers printing fake menus and practicing table manners for when we own a restaurant one day. We dreamt big, in secret, just the two of us. So when I got the call from my cousin inviting me to family dinner at Vincent's Prime Kitchen, I hesitated. It wasn't a real invitation, more like a, "You can come if you want" text sent 2 hours before the reservation. I knew what it was, a pity invite, a reminder that I was on the outside. But Jalen, he lit up. "Vincent's, that's the one with the big glass windows and chocolate cake, right?" I nodded. "I want to go," he said. "I want to see it for real." And just like that, I agreed. I put on my best black dress, the one I wore when I signed my first business contract. I curled my hair and did my makeup in the bathroom mirror while Jalen picked out his tiny blazer. He even used my hairspray to flatten his edges and asked if his shoes were too shiny. He was excited. I was anxious. It had been years since I sat at a table with all of them. My mother, Patrice, with her sharp tongue and thin compliments. Uncle Leonard, who always had something to say about how I never quite figured it out. Marcus, my brother, who used to be my protector, but now mostly stayed silent. And Grandpa Reggie, who never approved of how I raised my son without a strong male figure. They didn't know I was part owner of that very restaurant. They didn't know how many sacrifices led to that moment. They didn't know I had quietly, steadily rebuilt a life out of pieces they assumed were trash. I didn't tell them, because I wanted them to see me the way they always had, until they couldn't anymore. And Jalen, he had no intention of staying silent. I should have trusted my gut. The moment Jalen and I walked through the doors of Vincent's Prime Kitchen, I could feel the weight of eyes landing on us. The air was cold, not the temperature, but the energy. My family was already seated at the long table near the back, linen napkins, water glasses sparkling in the candlelight, and that silence, that fake polite hush when someone shows up who wasn't really invited. "Well, look who decided to come," Uncle Leonard called out, loud enough for people at other tables to glance over. I smiled, tight. "Good to see you too, Uncle." Patrice, my mother, raised both eyebrows. "Oh, you brought Jalen." Like I'd shown up with a stray dog instead of her own grandson. Jalen stayed close to my side, his hand gripping mine as we walked to our seats. I helped him into his chair, took off his blazer, and tried not to notice how no one offered to scoot over or make room for his coat. "Hope the traffic wasn't too bad," Marcus said without looking at me. He was already halfway into his bourbon, avoiding eye contact. "Nope, we live pretty close," I said, unfolding my napkin slowly. "Still in that little place off East Boulevard?" Leonard asked, spooning soup into his mouth like he hadn't just thrown a jab. I nodded, refusing to let him see me flinch. For now. That's how the night went. Death by 1,000 cuts. Nobody said anything outright cruel, but everything was just sharp enough to sting. "Are you working these days?" Patrice asked, swirling her wine. "Last I heard, you were doing something online." "I work full-time," I said, "and I run a consulting business." "Oh, like one of those pyramid things." She chuckled, turning toward Marcus. I forced another smile. Number I help small businesses with branding and development. Real businesses. She sipped and said nothing more. Jalen stayed quiet. He was coloring the kids' menu with a crayon, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He always felt it, even when no one spoke directly to him. He's like me in that way. He reads the room, absorbs the energy. As we ordered, Leonard glanced at the menu and said loudly, "I hope you didn't skip rent to eat here. They charge by the syllable." A few people laughed. Not me, not Jalen. "Don't worry," I said softly. "We'll be fine." "Sure you will," Leonard muttered, shaking his head. Always scraping by, but somehow still showing up. Must be nice. Patrice leaned in toward him and whispered, not nearly quiet enough, "She's probably still getting child support. That's how she keeps popping up." My heart started pounding in my ears. I stared down at the bread plate in front of me, trying to pretend I hadn't heard that. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck. Shame, anger, exhaustion. It would have been so easy to snap, to yell, to list everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd built. But what would that prove? They weren't interested in understanding me. They were interested in keeping me in a box. "You okay, Mom?" Jalen asked quietly. I looked at him and saw the worry in his eyes. 10 years old, wearing his little blazer, sitting up tall like he didn't want to embarrass me, but his fists were clenched in his lap. "Yeah, baby," I whispered. "I'm okay." But I wasn't. Even the waiter felt it. He brought our food to the table too fast, too quiet, like he was trying not to interrupt the storm. As he set my plate down, Leonard smirked and said, "Careful with that filet, Amira. Might be the last time you taste something this expensive till next Christmas." That was it. I saw Jalen's hand slowly reach down to his backpack, which was hanging from his chair. "Can I say something?" he asked, looking up at me. I blinked, startled. "What? Now?" "Please, I need to." I didn't know what he was about to do, but I nodded, because I trusted him. The room was about to change. None of them saw it coming, but my son did. "Can I say something?" Jalen's voice was soft, but it cut through the noise like a knife through glass. The table went still. Leonard paused, mid-bite. My mother's wine glass froze an inch from her lips. Even Marcus looked up for the first time in 20 minutes. All eyes were on my son, 10 years old, with a chest full of truth and a look in his eyes that said he was done watching them chip away at me. "Please," he said again, "can I say something?" I looked at him. Really looked. He was nervous. His small hand trembled slightly as it reached for the backpack hanging off his chair. But his chin didn't shake. His spine stayed straight. He'd never done anything like this before. Jalen was the quiet kid, the thinker. He stayed in the background at family events, clinging to my side or focusing on his crayons. But tonight, something in him snapped, and he wasn't going to let it slide. I leaned in and whispered, "What are you doing?" "Telling the truth," he whispered back. "They don't get to talk about you like that." He unzipped the backpack and pulled out a folder, one I hadn't seen in weeks. My folder, the one I'd used for our pitch. It had my business plan, grant approval letter, and partnership agreement, all the documents tied to the investment I made into Vincent's Prime Kitchen. When I landed the deal, I showed it to Jalen one night after dinner. I'd wanted him to see what progress looked like in black and white. Apparently, he'd kept it, and now he wanted to use it. I hesitated. A part of me was scared, not of what he'd say, but of what they'd do to him. Would they turn that coldness on him too? Would they laugh? Would they cut him down the way they did to me? But then he looked up at me with those same eyes he had the day he was born, strong, wide, and ready. So I nodded. He stood up on his chair, folder in his little hands, and faced the table full of adults. "We bought this restaurant last week." Silence. Actual, real silence. Not the awkward kind you fill with napkin folding or water sipping, but the kind that sits heavy on the chest, the kind that makes people freeze because their brain needs a second to catch up. "My mom owns part of this place now," Jalen said, flipping open the folder. "She worked hard every night when I was sleeping. She wrote stuff. She helped people start businesses. And then she got this big grant from the state and met a nice man who helped her invest in this restaurant. He wasn't even looking at the papers. He had memorized every detail. So, we're not poor. We don't need child support. We just don't tell people everything because we don't like showing off. Patrice's mouth dropped slightly. Leonard's chewing had stopped altogether. Grandpa Reggie blinked and looked down at the table like he was checking to see if this was real. Also, Jalen added, just because someone doesn't say stuff doesn't mean they're not doing things. My mom is the hardest working person I know. She's not broke, she just doesn't brag. He sat back down, folded the papers neatly, slid the folder back into his bag. My hands were frozen. My heart? I couldn't even feel it. Like I was only allowed to speak if I had good news they could approve of, or bad news they could use as proof that I was still failing. But the silence at that table after Jalen spoke, that was different. It was the kind of silence that comes when a truth lands so heavy, there's no quick way to recover. Not from a 10-year-old who stood up, looked every adult in the eye, and told them something they never thought they'd hear, that his mom had made it. They didn't say much after that. A few questions, some awkward nods. I could see them trying to catch up to the reality that I wasn't who they believed I was. But I didn't need applause or validation from them, because the only person whose opinion truly mattered was sitting right beside me, drinking his lemonade and smiling like he'd just told the world exactly what they needed to hear. We left shortly after dessert. Jalen asked for the chocolate cake to go. As we walked out of Vincent's, he turned to me and said, "That was better than any school presentation I ever did." "You did something people twice your age don't have the courage to do," I told him. "I just didn't want them to think you're small," he said. That hit me harder than anything. For so long, I had accepted the role they wrote for me, quiet, struggling, dependent. I wore it like armor, convincing myself that if I just kept my head down, worked hard, and didn't stir the waters, maybe one day they'd respect me again. But Jalen never saw me that way, and because of him, I finally stopped seeing myself that way too. A few weeks later, I walked into Vincent's on a Friday night, not as a guest, but as a co-owner. The front staff greeted me by name. One of the servers handed me the clipboard with the evening notes. I glanced around the dining room, watching the hum of conversation, the steady rhythm of plates coming in and out of the kitchen. This wasn't a dream anymore. This was real. Jalen sat at the front table with his iPad, helping the hostess confirm reservations. He was so proud. Every time someone walked in, he'd smile and say, "Welcome to my mom's restaurant." No hesitation. No fear. I didn't correct him. Not once. Because honestly, that boy earned his right to say that. As for my family, Leonard hasn't reached out since that night. Not a text, not a call, and I'm okay with that. Patrice sent a short message 2 days later. "Next time you're doing something big, maybe keep us in the loop." I read it twice and never responded. Marcus followed my business Instagram and liked a few posts. No words, just a silent click of acknowledgement. That was enough. Grandpa Reggie hasn't said anything to me directly, but according to my cousin, he told someone at church that Amira's actually doing all right now. I'll take it. But more than anything, what changed after that dinner wasn't them. It was me. For the first time, I stopped needing them to believe in me. I started walking taller. I spoke with more conviction. I no longer explained or apologized for the way I lived, because the truth is, people will doubt you until the day they can't. And sometimes, you're too busy building something real to waste time convincing those who'd rather cling to their version of your failure. And when the day comes that you rise, when the thing you built in the dark finally gets its moment in the light, you don't have to say a word. Let your work speak. Let your child speak. Let your peace speak. "Are you happy now, Mom?" Jalen asked me one night as we locked up the restaurant together. I smiled. "I'm not just happy," I said. "I'm free." And if you're watching this, feeling like no one sees you, like your family only knows the version of you that used to fall apart, just remember, you're allowed to outgrow their narrative. Let them talk. Just keep building. So if you've ever been underestimated, if people have written you off, laughed at your journey, or labeled you based on who you used to be, let this be your reminder. You don't owe anyone a performance. You don't have to fight to be seen. Just stay consistent, stay focused, and let your growth speak louder than your defense ever could. And when the day comes, because it will come, when the room goes quiet and they finally realize what you've built, don't gloat, don't shrink, just smile. Because that silence, that's the sound of your power being felt. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone you love, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below telling me what you're building in silence. And if you want more real, raw stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment. Your story matters, and I'm honored to tell mine with you. See you in the next one. Love.